Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. I'm James Walker. I'm your host for this episode because this is a podcast hijack. Your usual hosts, Dan and Amelia, have been buried in the basement. No, they haven't. Dan is on set. He is editing his latest feature film, and Amelia is in the United States. So I'm delighted to be taking over for a few episodes here because we are recording live at the Media Production and Technology Show here at London Olympia. And usually it wouldn't be possible to record a podcast at such a busy show. You may be able to hear in the background a little bit of the noise because there are literally thousands of people here. There is every bit of shiny tech to do with the film and television industry that you can imagine. And we're delighted to be here. We're courtesy of our partners at Canon, and we're at a booth. So you can actually be watching this as well. Usually the Young Film Academy podcast goes out audio only, but this is video. And we've got some wonderful cameras here and some editing software. And we're in this almost soundproof booth to make this all possible, which is a segue into the idea of sound, because today I am delighted to be joined by two gentlemen who know an enormous amount about sound. There's not much these two together don't know about the art and craft of putting sound into film and television. So I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Moseley from Films at 59 down in Bristol. Brian and I go back a long way. It's great to have you with us, Brian.
Yeah, great, James. We've worked together in the past, so it's nice to be here again.
So good. And we're also joined by Andrew Wilson from AMPS, which is the Association of Motion Picture Sound. Andrew, I believe you are currently the chairman of that organisation.
That's true, yeah. And actually, I used to work with Brian at Films at 59.
Aha, so there's stories that are going to come out here, I can see.
And some that are definitely not going to come
out. We can hold those. Well, this is great. So, gentlemen, we've got a wonderful hour to talk about everything to do with sound and to unpick it. And for a lot of young people, I think when they come to the idea of making films or making television, almost sound is secondary to some degree. I learnt the hard way, and I'm a big believer that sound is at least 51%. It's not 49. Often people go the other way. I think the old adage, you can sort of make almost any visuals with good sound and it's watchable and people watch it, but you can have the best visuals in the world with absolutely terrible sound and it's completely unwatchable. So, huge fan of sound myself. So maybe we can start by just telling us kind of what your titles officially are, and then maybe a little bit about kind of what it is that you both do currently. So maybe, Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I claim my job title as a re-recording mixer. So what I do is I am pretty much the last thing in the chain. They go off and film it, which will be done by a production sound mixer. They will then go to a sound editor. There may be a Foley editor, there may be a dialogue editor, there may be an ADR editor, there might be a music editor. There's all these different editors, and then eventually it comes to me. And as the re-recording mixer, my job is to re-record it all, mix it all together. It's kind of like a TV chef. Everybody's done the prep. They've gone and peeled the vegetables, chopped the vegetables, put them all in those little bowls. My job is to cook the dinner. So the thing that you see when it goes out on TV or when it's shown in the cinema, if the music's too loud and you can't hear the words, that will be me.
Got you.
Well, it wouldn't be me, obviously.
No, because you would never do that. No, you would never do that. And Brian, what's your title?
Officially, my title is dubbing mixer. It's exactly the same thing. It's a British term for the same role, essentially. They both come from the same thing. So, obviously, when sound was first recorded for films, it was recorded on location by a sound mixer. As a result, they earned the title sound mixer. It then has to go through the process afterwards of all the sound editing and creation, and then re-recording back to tape or film afterwards. Hence, re-recording mixer. The British decided to use the term dubbing mixer, dubbing to tape. They're kind of interchangeable, really. I use dubbing mixer for UK projects. I use re-recording mixer for American projects. That's generally the kind of distinction, I'd say.
Because a lot of young people and a lot of people out there will think of dubbing. They'll kind of think of a bad spaghetti western.
Quite right.
The
yes.
kind of, the voice has been put on later and the words are moving. But it doesn't really mean that.
In a way it does, and that's why dubbing mixer is quite a confusing term, but it's sort of stuck in the UK a little bit. So, yes.
One of the reasons why it's actually an AMPS, the association sort of policy to use re-recording instead of dubbing, because in America, dubbing is what you do to a foreign language film to put it into English. And when it comes to awards, and we all want to win awards, dubbing is not seen as being part of the creative process. It's just a translation process. So there have been one or two documented cases of people not getting their name on an award because they weren't considered to have done a creative input.
Because they call themselves dubbing mixers, not re-recording mixers, even though it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same pay.
Yeah.
It's the same qualification. It's all exactly the same. So to Americans, it's a very different
thing. Well, we like to sort of demystify on this pod and kind of talk de-jargonize as well. So there's you've both said tons of jargony words. So we're just going to
be mindful of that.
We're going to no, that's my job. So we're going to backtrack a little bit and talk about that. But first of all, so re-recording. When you say you are re-recording, I mean, it doesn't sound like you are re-recording. So can you just talk us through that?
Well, it's re-recording in that the sound of, say, the actor in a scene was recorded on the set, on the location, on the soundstage, whatever, where they shot the movie, it was recorded. In order to put it into the finished mix, we re-record it. We record it a second time, playing it back off a machine. We put an effect on it. We maybe add some reverb, or we set the volume. We balance it against the music and the sound effects, and then we record it a second time. So that's why it's a re-recording.
And is that almost a hangover from analog versus digital? Like in digital, is it a bit more of a transfer with stuff happening in the transfer?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, essentially the workflow is the same.
Yeah.
All that's really changed is the technology.
Got you. Great.
Not doing things real time to tape like we used to, or so on. It's now, it's all digits.
Yeah, it's all digits.
Yeah,
great.
Faster than real time stuff.
And so let's, I suppose, start with the journey of sound. I suppose let's try and break this down. So, because I know that actually you both have experience in natural history, which we're going to come to talk to, nature programs, David Attenborough stuff, wonderful. I love it, and we'll come to talk about that. But also drama on TV, short films, feature films. So I suppose talk us through. A lot of listeners will be aware that there's a sound recordist on a set. They're kind of recording mainly dialogue and actors' voices, but maybe they're getting other stuff. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about the kind of things they might get. And at some point, they hand over their digital files to somebody, and then there's a whole lot of stuff that happens, and then someone watches the end result on television or cinema or whatever. So maybe, Brian, can you just talk us a little bit through that journey and who does what when?
Well, one of the key things, obviously, is the sound captured on location. Say you're doing a film or a drama shoot, you'll hopefully have a very good sound recordist on location. Their main job is to capture what the actors are saying as cleanly and as clearly as possible. That's the key part. That's what a whole soundtrack is based on. Most stories are told through character dialogue. So that becomes our core element that has to be perfect. And it's almost to the point that their focus is on that exclusively. So everything else, all the other noises, all the backgrounds, all else is reduced as much as possible. We like to have these things separately. So that's the first stage, is really, really focusing.
What kind of say we're talking about crowd sounds or train?
Absolutely, or yes, yeah. Say for example, you're filming in a scene, in like outside the window here. You've got a busy bar, you've got a conversation happening. Your actors will be talking. You want everyone else to be as quiet as possible. They should be miming, not actually making noises.
I've heard that often those scenes that everyone looks like they're talking, they're actually not for sound
mouthing. Yes. The funniest things are, say, scenes when there's supposedly music playing, like a nightclub scene, and you've got people dancing to no music. It's hilarious to watch. But the whole point is getting that clean and clear dialogue, and that is the clearest thing and the most important thing to focus on at that stage. We should probably stick with that. Andrew, do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I was going to say that anecdotally, there's a very cool thing they do. If you've got to film a scene where people are meant to be in a nightclub and they're all meant to be dancing, if they can't hear the music, they won't look like they're dancing in time, and then it's going to look like
they're just all out of.
Well, it's a disco full of scientists. In order to get around that, like there's lots of different techniques, but one thing that's used is a thing called a thumper, which is basically it's a very low frequency speaker, which you can even attach to the floor if you want, but it basically goes at a very, very low frequency. So everyone in the room can hear it and they can all dance around in time with it. But it's such a low frequency that when it comes to post-production, we can just apply a filter and say, well, we can't hear it. We just turn
So
down.
you isolate that particular
get rid
frequency.
of that super low frequency, get rid of it.
Because it is not a frequency that usually occurs in human speech or other sounds.
Not even, sort of the deepest voiceover, man. It doesn't, human voices just don't go down there. So
I see.
You can put a thing that no one's ever going to hear, or it's very easy to remove, and then it looks like everyone's. And then the other thing you need to do is you need to get the actors to yell their heads off.
Yes.
Because otherwise it doesn't feel like they're shouting over the music.
Oh, I see. So there's a tendency, because they can't hear anything, for them to
Just
talk
speak softly.
normally. I
Yeah.
see. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Got
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah.
Nightclub scenes.
No.
Tricky.
The other trick I've
Tricky.
seen done is the thumper. I didn't know about, actually. That's new to me. The other technique I've seen is to play the music for a while, get people in a rhythm, then turn it off, and they have to try and keep the
Memorise.
same
Keep
tempo
the beat.
going.
Keep the beat.
With varying degrees of success.
Oh my God,
You see them drift out of time, but yeah, it helps sort of set the scene. But that's the whole point. It's trying to create an environment where the only thing you're capturing is the important speech that you need.
Got you. So a sound recordist on set is largely focusing on that dialogue. Would they be getting anything else? Is there anything else that they're doing at the time?
Yeah, they will record some other stuff. They'll record room tone or wild track, whatever. So they'll basically, in the room, in the set, or if they're on location, they're filming in a house or something, as opposed to on a soundstage. It's sort of more important that you have some of the sound of the place without anybody saying anything, because that's very useful in editing. If you want to be able to cut bits out, you can then fill it with some background. So they'll be recording a wild track.
This is a brilliant thing, because we've seen this at Young Film Academy with a lot of our young filmmakers, is that they don't do that.
Right.
And so let's break down because when we say room tone, so Andrew, what exactly do you mean by room tone? Because a lot of people won't even be aware that rooms have a tone.
Okay. Well, if you'd like to hear some, here's some now. That. It's just the sound of the room without anybody talking.
That was a live demonstration. No,
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
else. Very high tech.
Yeah, and actually that's, in my experience of what you actually get from a set, that's quite long. To get the crew to be quiet
For literally 2
more
seconds.
than 2 seconds is quite difficult. It would be nice if we could have 30 seconds or a minute.
Well, I have been on many sets where there's a shout of wild track, everyone quiet.
Yeah.
And there's always someone who's not.
No, it's rare.
Yeah.
It's rare.
And all the kind of, a lot of the sort of camera people and the grips, what have you, kind of go into slow motion. So if they sort of creep around,
But then you
thinking
get
they're not
clunk.
making any noise.
Clunk. Yeah. And then the idea is therefore that if you need to sort of splice bits together and you don't have the accompanying sound, you can use that room tone to sort of mask the join.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah. If you want to, if someone's maybe run a sentence together a bit and you want to slightly space out the dialogue, for example, you need to, if you put nothing in the gaps, it'll sound like it's dropping out. So by filling it with the thing that's running in the background, you can.
And I suppose you wouldn't be able to get that sound off your library of sound effects from the Atmoses, because that room has such a specific tone that it'll never quite
You
match.
can probably get close. I mean, if we had to fake the background sound of this room, we could probably find a recording of a big crowd and then turn it down a bit and muffle it and try and match
Got
it.
you.
But there's things you can do, but there's nothing beats the real thing.
It makes it so much simpler, doesn't it?
Got you.
And for the time it takes someone to record 30 seconds of just nothing,
Then it does.
it can.
So, Brian, a sound recordist gets the dialogue hopefully clean. They get some room tone.
Mm-hmm.
And who then, Brian, did they give that sound to, and what happens? What's the next step?
The next step is usually going into the picture edit with this audio, and I won't go into the the fancy details of that because I don't really know it. But someone's job is to make sure this audio and video is in sync and queued up, ready to go for the edit, and then it's down to the picture editor to be cutting with that and using the audio. If you've got a busy film shoot with lots of actors, for example, hopefully each actor's wearing their own microphone as well. You suddenly start dealing with lots of different channels of audio, not just booms being swung overhead. Hopefully every actor is also wearing their own personal microphone, so we've got their voice as clean and clear as they can. That can obviously, on a big shoot, turn into quite a messy timeline for the edit, and it becomes something that the editors have to either handle themselves or they'll be cutting with a mixed down location audio track, and that becomes something we have to then unpick later on.
Can we just pause there to explain what that means? So essentially when we say track, we're talking about almost like if you're editing, if anyone's used editing software, you'll be familiar with kind of the horizontal rows of tracks. So it's what you're saying is that almost, let's say you had 10 actors in a scene, they might all have their own row.
Absolutely.
Even when they're not saying anything, you've got sound of them. And so quite quickly that becomes just a lot of data to manipulate and deal with.
Yeah, it's quite hard for the editors to work with that. Your timeline built up very, very quickly, and a lot of time it's not useful. You only want just one word here and there. So it becomes a file management, media management thing to deal with, doesn't it? It's quite unwieldy. Sometimes to make that, sorry, Angela, sometimes to make that simpler, the location sound recordist, as well as providing all these separate elements, will sometimes provide a mixed down track of everyone all together, and that can be used as a guide track for the edit. Sometimes it's hard to work with because it's too much going on, but it can be quite useful. But yes, then it becomes our job later to try and rebuild the timeline from all those source elements.
So essentially the picture editor is using a sort of temporary, if you like, version, which doesn't have to sound amazing, it just has to sound good enough for everyone to get a good sense.
Yep.
And once that's been locked, the action, the dialogue, it gets handed to you guys who have to kind of go back to the drawing board to find all the really good sounds in order to build that back up. Is that accurate, Andrew?
Pretty much. I mean, what will, certainly if it's a movie or a drama or what have you, then once the picture department have done their thing, or even while they're doing their thing, because you can't, if everybody waits for the other person to finish, it's going to take years to make the film, so there's very often some overlap. But the location sound will usually be handled by a dedicated dialogue editor, possibly even a team of dialogue editors on a very big project, and it's their job they will relink. There are ways with metadata and timecode and things like that where you can automatically now relink your multi-channel recordings which came from the set to the edit, which of course now it's in a slightly different place because it's been edited, but there are ways of just doing sort of clever automatic relinking of that sort of stuff, and they will take the best takes. They also may, if we've cut away from one of the two actors that's talking to the perspective of the other person, we got an over-the-shoulder shot, you can put in a different take, or there may be a better performance, or there may be a clearer delivery of a couple of words. They will cleverly construct, they will take the best bits and compile it together. The other job that they will take on is if there are bits which just aren't any good because maybe the actors turned away microphone like that. I'm trying to go method here.
It's another live demo.
But if the actor's moving on and off the microphone like this, then if it's unrecoverable, then they will want to replace it. So the dialogue editor will then generally make a call on, we need to record ADR for this.
And ADR is what?
It's automated dialogue replacement. I don't know why it's called that, because it's the least automated.
It's done by a human.
It's the most manual thing we ever do.
It's the most labour-intensive thing we do.
Yeah, but basically what happens with that is that the actor comes into a studio later on. They're not on the set. They come in, although there are ways of doing it on the set. There's a very cool thing called Space Crate, which where you can set up a not unlike this, a small booth right outside the main shooting stage. So because a really big movie will probably still be shooting when it's already in post-production to get the timescales right, so they can, they can call for pickups and the actors come in. But basically what happens is the actors will come in to a controlled sound environment and they will have to recreate the performance from the day.
Well, the example I've heard of this is the sort of the famous one that we talk about, Young Film Academy, sort of James Bond, Daniel Craig, kind of coming into a studio for a fight sequence after the event. It's all been shot, and then he sits in the booth and he watches himself in the fight and has to do all the all that stuff.
Yeah.
So he basically does that for sort of 2.5 hours, and then goes home.
Yeah, and gets paid.
And gets paid.
I mean, yeah,
What's not to love?
He's living the dream. I mean, ADR is an interesting thing because the actors are required to re-deliver the performance, but they're out of context. They don't have the other actors to act against. They don't have the costume. They don't. It is quite a big call. Some actors are brilliant at it. Some don't like doing it. So you've got all that.
And you're only doing it when the sound from the set is sort of not good enough. Is that the idea, or would you do it anyway?
Sometimes it's done to change the words. They might, for example, they write the script, and when they put it together, they think, oh, blimey, this is long. So they want to cut it down, but they then might need someone to deliver a line differently because the line that they shot on the location refers to a character that's now been cut out of the film. So, if they're doing the line where they say, I'm sitting here in this podcast with Brian and James, and then Brian gets cut out of the thing.
Sure. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah.
It's understandable.
It might happen.
I went 50-50. I chose him.
Although I think this is live, so I don't need to cut Brian.
But if we then cut him out, I would need to come in and redo the line saying, I'm sitting here doing this podcast with James. And you have to remove that line. So sometimes they will have to do an ADR for... So there's performance ADR or editorial or script ADR, and then there's also technical ADR. So it's technical if there was a problem with the sound on the location, whereas it's performance or editorial ADR if it's to change the content.
Got you. So you've got now the sort of the dialogue elements. I understand it's complicated, multi-tracks. You're pulling out each individual actor's microphones. You're going back in. You've got hard drives full of all of this stuff. It's a nightmare of just looking after the data. But now you've got, for your film or whatever, you've got the dialogue essentially done. So Brian, are you then adding in other sounds from and what is a sound designer? Is that you as well? Like, what's that element?
Sound design is a term not used a huge amount in TV and film. It tends to be for someone who's done a lot of or creative sound from source. Sometimes known as a slightly pretentious term. We use sound editors as a term, and people tend to divide, certainly on things like dramas and films, into sort of separate roles. Andrew mentioned already there might be dialogue editors, sound effects editors, and so on. Even Foley editors. We'll get to that as well. But the idea, after we start with this clean, raw character dialogue, we then have to build the world up around it as well. So it's not that we want it to be quiet, we want it to be full of sound and full of life, but we want to be able to choose how much of each element, and that becomes key. It becomes a tool that you use as part of the storytelling as well. So we would probably first start by adding, a bit like you hear now, background sounds. The sound, someone's in a bar. Actually, we've got it clean. Now let's start filling it up with some background atmosphere. So now it sounds a bit fuller.
And are you going into a bar and recording, or are you bringing that off a library of sound effects?
Only if we're very good.
Depends who's paying. There are huge sound libraries full of stuff. The best thing, obviously, is to go to some of these locations, but we don't get to go out to everywhere that things are filmed. I wish they did. So yes, we're dipping into lots of sound libraries and archive recordings from previous shoots that have been used when they've captured stuff. And so, yeah, we'll start by creating this sort of base background, in a way almost neutral, not too much stuff going on. It is the sound of the environment that you're in, the sound of the room or the forest or the bar or whatever. Nothing too specific, just a very general background. And then into that, you then start building sounds for the actions within the scene. Maybe it's door slams or someone putting the glass on the table. Say we're in the bar. The sound of actually, we might add some more chatter, say that in that kind of situation, if there's more chatter in the bar, we might actually, in addition to the ADR settings, we might get actors back into a booth, sometimes background actors or, what's the technical term? Crowd actors, people who'll come into the studios and they'll just ad lib burble and laughter and whatever else to bring a scene to life and ad lib watching the film. Again, a different skill. Not many actors can do that. There are some people who do that. That's their job, which is amazing.
It's the equivalent of at school, you've got to say rhubarb. At the back of the school play, they just said, pretend you're talking. You just go rhubarb.
But these guys come in and they create full backstories and interesting things. What a skill, full ad-libbing.
Yeah, if you get some good actors in the room, you just say, okay, give us Crowded Bar. And they'll all just somehow organically make quite a good sound. And then you could say to them, can you make it more French? And they just make it more French or German or whatever you want to do, or you want to make it sound, we want it to sound more. I don't know. Is this, what part of town is this bar? Is it a pub? outside a football stadium, in which case you're going to have a certain type of people in there because they've all just come from the match, what have you? Or is it a trendy wine bar in the posh bit of town?
Yeah, because you're enhancing that sense of place, aren't you, within the story? You know, if it's set in a particular area, you need to enhance that in the sound design.
It's immersive the viewer in the same situation as well. It's creating an environment that means it's believable to them too.
Yeah, totally. So you've got some of those sounds, and then I've heard terms like cloth. Maybe we talk about Foley, these kind of things. Maybe Andrew, take us through what are those?
So there's a lot of stuff which you want to hear the sound, or we want to incorporate the sound of a thing within the film, but to record it on the location will be impractical. It would, and the reason it makes it impractical is because it takes too much time, and time is money on a set. If you've got 180 people on a big movie set, you don't want to hold them all up because you want to adjust the microphone slightly so that you can hear the sound of the.
It's more live. We're getting cloth here live again. So another live demo.
So very often, a lot of that stuff we can record separately. Another example is if you're making a film where you've got a simple conversation between two people who are chatting in a kitchen while one of them is making a cup of tea. That's fine. You'll probably hear the sound of the kettle pouring and the stirring and the sugar going in and a bit of milk. You'll hear all those things as part of the performance. But the problem is if we're going to make some money out of this film, we need to sell it around the world. So if we're going to sell a version to other countries so that they can mix it into their own language, then we need to send them a mix which doesn't contain the dialogue. But the problem is if we dump the dialogue off the tea making scene, we also lose all the sounds of the teacups.
So interesting, of course.
So what we do is we get a person.
Sorry, just to clarify, because that if you go to Japan, let's say, they're going to get Japanese actors to come into a studio to do an ADR. They're going to dub that and put it onto the mouths moving. So yes, you've lost all that location sound, more or less, has gone. So you're having to create everything.
Yeah. So we recreate the sound of pouring kettle. I mean, the kettle coming to a boil, that probably a sound effect from a library, but the spoon stirring it and all that kind of stuff, it's easier to do it in sync with what's on picture if you just get a cup, put some water in it, put a teaspoon in it, and watch
get a
the
microphone
and just move your hand at the same speed. That is called Foley. It's known as Foley after Mr. Foley, who was
Arthur Foley, I think, wasn't it? Yeah,
Jack Foley.
Jack Foley. Sorry,
who he worked at.
Warner. I want to say Warner Brothers.
I'm not sure on that, but he worked in the very early days of sound for movies, sort of back in the 1930s. He was the guy that would make all the sound effects, and so they'd be putting their film together and say, "Oh, I can't hear that bit where she walks across the room." Oh, well, we'll need to get some footsteps, but people just say, "Oh, we'll send that to Foley." And that's where
because he did it for all the movies on the studio.
He was the go-to guy. So Foley is a big deal, and there's a lot of Foley.
And I've actually come to work with you, Brian, in a sort of Foley studio, and they're wonderful places because it's almost like a kid's dream. You've got these rooms full of all the things that you guys use. It's toys and tactile bits of things that you're creating. And I mean, it made me talk because I actually had some experience in radio and BBC World Service stuff, and back when I was a young person. And I remember when we did Crunching Through Snow, that was used with videotape. So they used to kind of string out loads of old videotape and then walk across the floor on that to get that kind of crunching of snow. And I remember coming to the room with you, Brian. There was the scene with kids where they put their hands up against rail, like sort of almost like grated railing, and you were getting that clinking sound as they did that, and so all that fun. So talk us through what kind of things might you be doing in a Foley, and what would you be using?
Gosh, exactly that. I mean, it's you have to create so many different types of things, and it's dictated by the images, of course. But in that example, I think I remember that was like a school fence. Was that right?
Yeah,
yes, it was. Yeah, one of those mesh school fences. And we needed a detailed close-up sound for it, which wasn't on the location sound, of course. So one option is to go out and find a fence and slap your hands on it outside somewhere, or to try and recreate it using what we had to hand. And I can't quite remember what I did for that one, but it's quite likely there was a bale of chicken wire or something like that attached to some a handful of metal. And the aim in the studio is to try and create something that, when it's in sync with the images, is believable. And it's not necessarily the same thing that you're seeing on screen, as long as it looks and feels right.
It's sort of cinema reel.
Absolutely, yeah. It involves lateral thinking, and it's.
I've got a great bit of a buzz phrase for that. In that, with any sound that you put into a film, it doesn't need to be the right sound. It needs to sound right.
Oh, that's good. That's because again, we talk when we go into schools, Young Film Academy, and do a day of filmmaking with them. We talk about this. We touch on Foley, and we talk about this with regard to punch sound effects.
Yes.
Because back in the day, in the old westerns and those things, I think there was the story that it used to be kind of almost like a cabbage that you cut in half, whack it with a rolling pin, and that kind of deep, bassy, crunchy sound was the sound of every punch you used to hear in the movies, which doesn't sound anything like the real sound, which is not that impressive. If you've ever seen a fight in a bar, it doesn't sound like much actually. Whereas in the movies, we want it to feel crunchy and impactful.
But one of the reasons for that is that as the audience, if someone's just been punched in the face or someone's been hit with a bat or something, breaking their arm, the sound that you hear in your head is not the sound that you would hear across the bar when the fight was going on. The sound that you hear as an audience member is as if it's happened to you.
First person.
Even though
really interesting,
it's that other guy over there that's in the fight, you want to hear it from the perspective of, like, you want to feel it as well. So and the problem is you can't, much as it would be desirable on occasion, punch someone in the face. There are one or two people who I think could probably earn quite a good living as a face that could be punched. But I don't know if there's that much living to be had from that.
No,
but we can make the sound. We can, like I say, it doesn't need to be the right sound. It doesn't need to be actually hitting that. We do a lot of the wildlife films, and in that, you might have a scene where there's a lion eating something that it's just caught, and there are certain noises that you kind of want to hear. Well, you can't record them because you can't go up to the thing with a microphone because it's quite dangerous, or it might just run off. So we need to hear those sounds, and we can make those sounds by thinking about what the sound should be, and then finding something that will make the sound. So if what it's eating is kind of crunchy, there's bones and stuff, celery's pretty good because it's kind of crunchy. If it's squishy, then oranges are pretty good. Stick your thumb in an orange, squish it about, you get horrible, if you need it to sound like
squelchy
liver.
Yeah.
You don't want to get liver, it's like gross. But an orange makes the room smell nice, and you can eat it afterwards. And if you need to do like ripping flesh, an orange is your friend again, because if you pull the peel off it and you hear the pith tearing off the fruit, if you do that really close up to a microphone, and you can use the microphone to exaggerate sound. Microphones work like ears, so the closer you get to it, you get a very different feeling if I move to here and if I move to here, but I haven't changed how I'm speaking. And microphones do exactly the same thing with sound effects. So if I open this bottle of water here, you hear a certain sound, whereas if I do it here, it's much more exaggerated. And we could actually use this probably for some insects.
Something else.
Like some bug crawling across a...
Well, I think this is a brilliant segue and a chance to do, we'll finish the journey of sound, but let's just take a kind of tangent, if we like, and go into the natural history stuff, because you've both worked on some of the biggest natural history shows going. So maybe let's start off by just giving us a sense. Maybe start with the kind of shows, because you've worked with some of the Netflix stuff, BBC stuff.
I've done, I started off at the BBC, but since then I've done them all. National Geographic, Discovery, Netflix, the
Blue Planet.
I did IMAX Blue Planet, Planet Earth, all the original ones, not the two. No one's ever made a film with two in it. Oh no, that's true. Terminator 2 was better than Terminator 1. Godfather 2. But most films with two in it. Jurassic Park 2. No.
Can we then, because Blue Planet, I love Blue Planet. I'm a very watery person, and I love that. But because part of the thing when you're shooting natural history is that, first of all, you're often a long way from the animals, because by its very nature you're on a long lens and you can't be too close because you scare them away and all that stuff. So you're a long way away, so physically you can't get any sound. So I'm guessing, and then of course underwater, that's a whole different kettle of fish. See what I did there? And so let's just talk a little bit about the challenge of working on something like Blue Planet, where you're getting, I would imagine, silent footage, and yet you need to create that sound of fish moving through the ocean or shoaling and all those amazing sequences of kind of, when the dolphins or the tuna are in or whatever it is. So give us a sense of what kind of things are you adding to those films to make it feel real to us, but I'm guessing it's probably mostly faked.
When you say mostly, that's a slight under...
That's
it's
undercooking
all fake. Yeah. So I would say on...
let's go artificial, maybe, rather than fake.
Not even that. Not even that. No.
No, the thing is, so what we're doing is storytelling. We're not trying to earn a PhD in what a dolphin sounds like. We are trying to tell the story of the dolphin and where it lives, or the tuna, or the shark, or the killer whale, or whatever it is. Even if it's just a crab or just an amoeba, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can't record an amoeba. They don't make microphones that small, and they don't wear shirts, so you've got nothing to clip it onto. They're hard work. Amoebas are difficult.
It's a market.
And also, it kind of looks like animation. So we're going to have to just... And going back to what I said earlier, it doesn't have to be the right sound. It has to sound right. So, but if you watch you watch a jellyfish swimming, it's this sort of weird pumping thing as it sort of wobbles its way through the sea. But you can imagine what that sound might be. In your head, you just think, well, it's going to be kind of, I don't know. I mean, and you just, then you go and find
and you make it, or how?
Sometimes, I mean, there is no greater tool available to you than your own voice. But the worst thing you can do is have it sound like it's your own voice. I mean, you can make a million noises. You can go, can we do all these boom, boom? I mean, like you get these guys that beatbox and stuff. They can make amazing noises. I'm not going to try and do that. I'm far too old. But the human voice is an amazing starting point, but the worst thing is if you see a jellyfish swimming by and you can hear someone going,
that's Andrew Wilson. I'm pretty sure that's Andrew Wilson.
Yeah, that's just going to be awful. Because what you
can affect the voice, I suppose.
You can affect it, yeah, but the chances are what you might have that as an element in there, but you're also going to add other stuff. You're going to add some water movements. You could maybe do a Foley pass where you swirl water. Or you could maybe blow air through water. I mean, there's lots of things you can do. You can try stuff, but with experience, you quite quickly get, it might not be water. You might want to use something. Well,
the sound I'm thinking is that often when you get those shoaling fish, those amazing shoals, and then you get those shots of one of the predatory fish kind of rushing at them, and you get that very sort of almost silvery motion of all the fish going as they move. Yeah. What are you physically using to do that? Have you done one of those, Brian? Or?
Yeah, quite a few. You mentioned tape earlier, magnetic tape.
Yeah.
One thing I've done is a handful of that sort of thin magnetic tape in the water, shushing it around to the surface. You get all that brightness shashing around.
But actually put it in the water.
On the surface, and then you can do sort of dynamic moves towards the mic, a bit like Andrew's doing it in a way.
The T-Rex arms are really...
The T-Rex arms. I'm short of space here. And I've done things like pouring from a bag of sugar into the water to get that kind of pouring sound. So that kind of...
Yeah, sugar has that lovely kind of cascading, tinkling.
Something like that, with sugar or rice. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was rice, actually. Dry rice. But yes, it had that sort of thing. But yeah, tinkly stuff, little bits of sound design, I guess. But yes, you're playing with...
And I suppose, so you get your bag of sugar, you pour it into the water, you record it, you put it against the shoaling fish, and you sometimes look at it and think, that sucks. Yeah. And sometimes you go,
it's part of the process, though. It's a collaborative process. You always, I've spent years working as a Foley artist as well as a mixer now, and as part of being a Foley artist, you're working with someone recording you, and you're a team, and they're going, actually, no, that didn't really work. That sounded a bit like too much like pouring sugar into water. That's rubbish. Try something else instead, and you experiment to get the right thing.
God, how fascinating! And I suppose this does bring in this, because I know we all want authenticity, in an era where we don't know what we're watching, especially now with AI, and what are we watching and how real is it? What, Andrew, do you feel about the kind of the ethics? Because I mean, viewers, when they watch Planet Earth or they watch Blue Planet or these wonderful nature programs made by the BBC or Netflix or others, they think it's real. Do you know what I mean? And so some young people or any listener listening to this might be going, I can't believe it. It's Andrew Wilson with a bag of sugar doing this,
Well, so again, we have to remember that we're storytelling, and we're also trying to sort of inform and educate, but essentially we are telling a story. We are imparting some information. I've got a good example. So thousands of years ago, I worked on a BBC series called Trials of Life, and there was a sequence in that which was the first time that the BBC had ever shown footage of a thing which you've probably seen: killer whales swim out of the sea land themselves on the beach and grab sea lions to take them out to sea and eat. And it's pretty dramatic. And what we saw in that sequence, which was about 7 minutes long, was like these huge 5-ton things coming out of the surf. You know, imagine being on like Bournemouth Beach and then this thing the size of like 2 Range Rovers comes out of the sea, grabs you and swims you off it. It's pretty dramatic. But what we saw in that 7-minute sequence was over 2 weeks of behaviour, all condensed down. And also it was shot on long lenses. It was shot with the camera off speed. I mean, water films, they nearly always film with the camera off speed, because if you're
off speed in slow motion in some way.
Well, maybe not full slow motion, but if you're making a film which is maybe 25 frames a second, you might actually run the camera at 30, 32, so that when you play it back, it basically stops the boat being as wobbly, which makes it less nauseating.
It looks slightly more dramatic, doesn't it?
It looks slightly more dramatic.
Yeah.
I think it looks a little bit bigger if you slow it down a little bit. But anyway, so we've got all this action of these gigantic creatures coming out of the sea and grabbing other ones, and it's all very dramatic. And it's entirely mute. There is no sound. We did actually have a real recording of a killer whale coming out of the sea and hitting the beach. And it was kind of like some sea wash with a bit of a crunch. It sounded like Miss Marple had fallen over on the Rectory Drive. It wasn't a big dramatic thing. So we set about making some sounds, and we put all sorts of stuff in there. It was all carefully sort of measured and treated and what have you. But some of the raw elements, there was the sound of a hovering Harrier jump jet in there. Big roaring noise. There was rumbles off a space movie. There was explosions, wave crashes, geysers going off, all sorts of elements, which we layered up subtly.
Geysers, you mean sort of big jets of water,
like
as opposed to
Londoners.
dudes. Yeah.
No.
That would sound odd, innit?
Yeah, there were geysers in there. No, geysers, maybe. Water spout. But we had all these different elements all sort of layered together, and we were feeling pretty good about it. So then we got the director in and we played it to him, and he said, whoa. And he said, look, Paul, who filmed this, he was in the canteen round at the BBC this morning. I'm going to give him a call. Can you play it to him if I bring him up here? Yeah, sure. So the guy that had actually filmed it, and he when he was filming it, he did a thing that the scientists have been studying this for years, and Paul had watched it for a bit, and he said, I'm going to get in the sea with them. And the scientists were like, are you mad? You're roughly the same size and shape as a seal. You'll be wearing a wetsuit, which is kind of seal coloured. I'm not sure that's a good idea. And he said, no, because they go up channels. And they don't go up here. So if I get in here, they're going to go either side of me, but they're not going to. I think I'll be fine. So he jumped in the sea and he filmed it. An extraordinary sequence.
Wow.
Anyway, he didn't get attacked. Yeah, he's still alive.
He is still here.
So he came in and we played it to him. And he turned around and he said, yeah. And I said, so did it sound like that? And he said, nope, not at all. But he said, I've just watched it here on that big screen with these big speakers, and it makes me feel exactly like I felt on the beach.
Yeah, so it feels right.
And then I thought, well, so we've got this right. If he'd said, I think it sounds ridiculously over the top, we've gone too far. If he said, yeah, it's good, but it doesn't take me back there. It doesn't give me the drama. But the fact that he said that this made him feel like he felt when he was on the beach made me think that if someone is sat at home watching TV, eating their microwave lasagna, and this has come on, and they go, whoa, and kind of shout through to the other room, hey, you've got to come and see this, and what we're getting at, that's a rather long anecdote to get to a point, but the point that we're trying to sell here is that there wasn't any real sound in that, but the experience of watching the, if you like, audio visual presentation, the cinematic experience, or the filmic experience to the audience, is as close as they're going to get to feeling like they've been there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think whether we're doing wildlife films or animation or drama or documentaries or even the news, if that's the most important thing, you've got to, if people buy into it, if people believe it's real, and they want to believe it's real, people will watch all sorts of stuff which obviously isn't real. They weren't real dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. And, hey, and by the way, Marvel, all made up. none of it happened.
Just spoiling everything
all
here.
that stuff. The Matrix, not true.
Yeah.
But the thing is, while you're even stuff that sort of looks slightly more real, like I know Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's it's kind of real sort of humanish shaped people doing things and the David fights and using long words, but you want to escape into it. You want for that whatever it is, a couple of hours, or Lord of the Rings 10 hours. It felt like it.
Well, I think you've absolutely summed it up. It's not about using the right sound; it's making it sound right.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely a brilliantly pithy way of summarising what you do there.
I do want to add one thing to that,
Yeah.
though. So one of the reasons I'm here at the Media Production Show is I'm doing a talk tomorrow, and one of the points of discussion about that is about authenticity in natural history sound. And so far we've talked about how we create it and fake it and make it out of nothing. We talked about the stuff that's fun and part storytelling, but the authenticity still has to be there. And so even on those shoots where it's very difficult to capture sound, say you're out filming lions, say from a long lens, you got a camera person sat in a Land Rover and you're filming them half a mile away, and you get these beautiful close-up images of them eating, like Andrew's saying, and you as the viewer, you want to be there alongside them as if you were right where the camera perspective is. We want to recreate that as accurately as possible. And so if there are like lion roars and so on, we're not faking that. I'm not going in the booth and pretending to be a lion. We're using real lions.
I wish you would, Brian.
No, rubbish at it. We are using real animal sounds. It might not necessarily be that lion. Yes, we got a session one in. No,
you've got a lion in for ADR.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to be there for that.
I think it's called ADR.
It's good. It's good.
That's what you do with pirates.
That's the pirate one. Absolutely.
But something we're doing increasingly more now is we are working with scientists on location and working with them, getting recordings they've done, and we're doing a lot of feedback. So we're sending stuff to them, and they're saying, "Oh no, that's actually the sound used there is a 1-year-old, and actually it's a 2-year-old cut," that kind of thing.
Well, I was going to say, you must have had times where you've done something, and almost someone who really knows, as a naturalist, looks and goes, "I'm sorry, those penguins, you've used the sound of a king penguin, whereas
Absolutely.
This is
We're striving to be as accurate as possible, down to it's not just the sound of a squawk; it's what it means as well. I mean, some animals have languages. The elephants have a huge range of calls that mean different things in different environments. They communicate to each other, and
ones that we can't even hear because they're subsonic.
Wow.
They're such low frequencies we can't hear them, but they're all chatting away.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have to be using the right things for the right environment. We can't have the sound of an elephant trumpeting when they're relaxed, for example, because it's not distressed. One's a distressed noise, one's a...
But to what extent do you, Brian, have to be the expert on that, or do you work with a kind of consultant you'll get in and sort of they'll say, no, sorry, that's the wrong sound for this thing, like, because you can't know all of that, can you?
I mean, I've not been on these shoots at all. I've been doing this 20 years now, more than 20 years, so I'm learning a lot of this stuff on the job. I defer most of those decisions to the production teams themselves, the wildlife filmmakers we're working with. They're the ones who've been out for 6 months, say, filming this particular pride of lions, for example, and they know them. They recognise their voices, so it's getting them to give us direction and feedback, and with researchers and scientists on location as well, to make sure that we are as accurate as we can be. And then, of course, we add the fun stuff as well, like the munching and the whatever else, to make it seem more real to the viewer. But at its heart, it has to have that authenticity. So,
except there's the one that I particularly love is when they do the slow motion of like plants growing, and often or they do the slow motion of like a kind of an insect eating plant when it kind of eats it, and there's all those sticky, sort of squelchy kind of growing sounds. Like, what kind of thing would you be using, Andrew, if you were like, what am I actually hearing when I hear those kind of time lapses? What am I?
Gaffer tape.
This is so good.
Lots of fruit and veg.
Gaffer tape and veg. Gaffer tape. You get a big ball of gaffer tape, roll it up. You can do all sorts of stuff with that, and then you're performing it. There is a fine line, and I think there's been a trend in a lot of natural history filmmaking in recent years to go too far with the sound design. I think sometimes it's like, oh, come on.
I'd agree with that.
Some of the effects that we're being asked to provide, it's like, yeah, but it's I don't buy it. I want to feel like if I'm watching a time lapse of a tulips growing or something, I want to actually, you can hear tulips growing. You can hear rhubarb growing.
Can you?
So, there are recordings of it. Yeah, and there are places they grow a lot of rhubarb in somewhere north. I can't remember where it is, Yorkshire, I think.
Well, listeners, go out and find
no,
a patch
no,
of rhubarb.
I'm sure if you search on,
there's people thinking we're
search
mad.
YouTube, you can find recordings of rhubarb growing because it grows so fast that it actually makes a little crackling noise.
Wow.
It's crazy. But I do think there is a trend at the moment for wanting to overly sound design it, because
You've got a Hans Zimmer soundtrack going on to it, right?
that's
as well.
that's a battle in
another
itself.
discussion.
Because and well, yeah, we could do another hour on the amount of music that's in natural history films, or I could also do it in one sentence. There's too much. I'd like to have a lot less, because I'd like to be able to sell more. What I don't get is I don't get a sense of the place. I want to feel like I know where these animals live and how they live. And a lot of that can be told by the sounds of their environment, the sounds of the things around them, the sounds of the things they do. Yes, you know, when you get the sort of chameleon strike, I don't know if you've seen it, but a chameleon's got this like ridiculous tongue that's longer than its own body that kind of flies out, grabs a bug. It's actually got a gripping thing on the end of its tongue, grabs the bug, and then crunches it up. And yeah, we're going to make some sound for that. Even it might be a whoosh as the thing comes out, and there's going to be crunchy bug.
Like, what might you use again? I love this. If it's not gaffer tape, what are you using for a chameleon tongue?
I don't know. I mean,
Anything squelchy.
something squelchy.
Yeah.
Basically, it's all gaffer. Well, I know with you guys that you have certain things that you just reuse over and over in different ways, right? It sounds like gaffer tape is one of them.
The thing with the chameleon tongue shot is because it's a very, very fast action, we don't know how much they've slowed it down by. So we can't have a generic thing.
Well, you also can't do slow motion sound, can you?
No.
That's a really interesting, because slow motion sound, if you've ever done that, and there might be listeners, if you slow anything down, it just goes because it lowers the frequency somehow. So actually, when you're working with a lot of slow motion in natural history, how do you have to think about the sound, Brian, with regard to that?
It's about making it authentic to what we'd expect. So even the slow-mo stuff has to be right. One thing that's really tricky for us sometimes is the tendency for slow motion bird song. If you see a bird doing slow motion stuff, you know, we can't have a slow down quack. It has to be the real sound, but it has to sync up. So someone has to go through and basically lip sync a bird of a real speed recording to a slow-mo image, because otherwise it would sound so wrong. It's meticulous and quite painful, to be honest. But it's,
and in fact, very, very slowed down birds is one of the sound elements that was used for dinosaurs in Jurassic Park.
it's true.
Is that right?
Yeah. If you slow them right down, they take, you know, instead of being, you get this kind of, it's a whole different world. So you can use those elements to kind of create new things, and that was reinforcing the idea that, you know, dinosaurs turned into birds.
We've recently
Wow.
worked on a series, 2 series in fact, called Prehistoric Planet for Apple TV. Again, it's like a dinosaur series. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was made in conjunction with BBC NHU, and the brief was, you know, make it look like a wildlife film. You know, that same kind of setup, the same kind of storylines, the same shots, but with dinosaurs in instead, CG. It was incredibly effective, but there were scientists on board in that who were guiding the sound editors on what to use, and they were saying, oh no, that dinosaur had a throat shaped like this, so it didn't make a squawking sound, it didn't rumble, it would have, you know, some of it's speculative, but some of it's based on the physics that they know now of the shape of it, and go, actually that one will growl, that one probably high-pitched squeak, even though it's a big animal. And that's been, you know, evolved learning as we go along. It's, you know, a lot of the sounds that we expect to hear in Jurassic Park, the roaring, they couldn't do, they would never be able to do. A T-Rex couldn't roar.
I think that's the thing, that talking to anybody with such knowledge like you guys, you realise how, as a viewer, you just, you know, you don't know any of this is going on. You just think you're listening to the sound of the thing, and actually all of this thought has gone into it. It's fascinating. Now, I have to ask you about David Attenborough, because he is an absolute, you know, a doyen of this industry. He is a personal hero of mine. And he has that voice, which makes, you know, if you listen to nature programs not voiced by David Attenborough, it just doesn't feel quite the same. And I think, Brian, off air, you were talking about the experience of working with him. Can you give us a sense of what was it like? Have you worked with him, and how did his bit of that voiceover work?
Absolutely. Well, I recorded him a couple of weeks ago, in fact. Historically, he's an amazing voice artist, as you know. He is naturally a storyteller. That's where his, you know, that's his USP. You know, he's not only a great naturalist and a fascinating human, he's an amazing storyteller. He doesn't produce films anymore. He doesn't really write the scripts necessarily anymore. They're written for him. However, he then rewrites them in his own words. He takes them and goes, oh, I see what you're saying here. And he puts it into a David speech. But he brings those stories to life in an incredible way. And one of the ways is the way he records it all live in one go. As I say live, as in it's a one take recording process. He comes in, settles in a voice booth. We start playing the film with some guide music and sound effects in his headphones, and he narrates it without stopping from beginning to end.
the picture.
To the picture.
So in real time.
Absolutely in real time. And he does it for that reason, because it has to flow like a story. I've never worked with anyone else who can do this. It's absolutely incredible.
And how many times will he do the entire film like that?
He will run through the film once without stopping, and the production team listening might note a few lines they want to change or pick up. Maybe a scientist's name he mispronounced. It can happen. Or he stumbles over a word because he misread it. Not very often, but it can happen. Or David himself might think, I could do a better one, and he might pencil on his own script. He gets to the end of the film, there'll be maybe 10, 15 lines. We'll go back and re-record. Job done. Happy, Thank you very much.
So he's in the studio for
an hour and 10 minutes for an hour film. It's absolutely astonishing.
What a pro.
Absolutely what a pro. And so, I mean, Andrew's recorded him a lot as well. Over the years, he's come into the studios with us to record. Now, post-pandemic, he knows it all from home. So, like home working.
Has he got a studio at home?
He has. I'll show you a picture. I wish I could. I wish I could show you. I've got a little screen grab of it. We do it over Zoom. Very much like a home setup. And he's got a corner of his living room set up with a microphone, not dissimilar from this. And behind him, a bit of soundproofing, which is just a duvet hung up. It looks really ramshackle, like to David in a pillow fort. And we. And in Bristol, we play the film to him over Zoom. He's got his script on one side, laptop on the other, and the same process happens. He does it all live, and we just do feedback via Zoom. We did it for pandemic reasons, of course, keeping him safe. But now, of course, we realise we can do that. He doesn't have to travel. So he just, does his recording from home. But the fact he's still going, he's just turned 98. I mean, it's astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing.
And also hasn't lost vocal facility as well, because older age, that becomes a little bit harder, doesn't it, Andrew?
Thanks.
I wasn't teeing you that one.
No, I mean, people's voice does change it. I mean, if you find some of the recordings of David from the 1950s and 60s, he sounds like a very different young man.
His accent has changed, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, but everybody spoke, or everybody that was on the BBC in those days spoke
clipped.
Yes, tremendous. Well done, Dorothy. Whereas now he's sort of more relaxed, but also, he's. I wouldn't say he's old. I'd just say he's matured. He's like a fine wine, and he's been well cellared, and he. The thing he's got that other people don't have is we've all grown up with him, and so he has such authority. If he came on TV and said, a zebra is in fact a fish, we'd all go, well, obviously, because David Attenborough says it.
The voice of truth. It's like Morgan Freeman does that in America.
Yeah, because you just buy into it. And he's of a level where I think when you get to a point, there's a level of kind of celebrity or of recognition in your craft when people talk about other people potentially being the next you. So when people say, oh no, this band, they could be the next Beatles, or that he could be the next Elvis, and when people say, oh, so-and-so could be the next David Attenborough, that's when you're in a very exclusive club to be someone that other people say could be the next one of. And he is absolutely that. And
I don't think anyone could be. There won't be another one. He's so unique.
Yeah.
His knowledge and passion and his history of working in TV. Of course, he used to be controller of BBC One and so on.
That's right. So he has a real managerial experience. So he understands it from the top. Yeah.
And his mind's so sharp, and his encyclopedic knowledge of stuff. Even there'll be scripts that have been written by the production team, have been vetted by scientists. David gets it and says, I'm not sure about that fact. And they look it up, and actually, it turns out, no, David was right. It's, wow. that wasn't the tallest grass. Actually, that one was the tallest grass in the world, or whatever.
Wow. I've once put him right though.
Have you?
Yeah. And
there's an anecdote.
It was when we were doing Planet Earth, and there was a line in it where they said that the polar bear was the world's biggest carnivore, and I said, I don't think that's true. And he said, I think we have checked this script. I said, well, I think you'll find a killer whale's bigger than a
polar bear.
Than a polar bear. And actually, the biggest carnivore in the world, I know this from Trivial Pursuit, is the blue whale, because it eats like krill. It's like pork.
Yeah.
So, but technically,
Technically
that's technically a meat. So it's the biggest thing, and it's eating a meat. Therefore, technically, the biggest carnivore is in fact the blue whale. Right. So, and it became the world's biggest land
carnivore.
Yeah.
which is true.
Yeah, that is true. Great. So, let's sort of bring ourselves back. We started off talking about the journey of sound, and we've had these fantastic tangents, and we've talked about how, to summarize, you're cleaning out the dialogue or not, if there's not, and then you're building the soundscapes, you're creating sounds. I think that's so creative, and I think, like, young people listening to this, there is a career in this that is so inspiring, and it's so fun. And at some stage, you kind of get to some sort of finished product where it looks and sounds kind of as you want it. Now, there's then words that people hear, often because they've got their home TV or a home cinema setup, or they've got their phone or the tablet, and you hear things like Dolby 5.1, Dolby surround sound, Dolby 7.1, Dolby Atmos, these kinds of things. So first of all, they always use the word Dolby. So maybe, Andrew, you could tell us a little bit what Dolby is, and then maybe, Brian, you could move on to sort of what is surround sound, what is Atmos, and how does that work briefly?
So Dolby is a company. It's a corporation founded by Ray Dolby, and he was a fantastic kind of inventor, engineer, innovator, blah blah, who did all sorts of clever things. I mean, the very first thing he worked on, which made quite a big difference to the whole world, was whilst he was a student, he did an internship at a company called Ampex in the United States. At that time, people were trying to record pictures, right, not onto film but onto some sort of magnetic tape, and in order to do that, you need to have a tremendous you had to move the tape very, very fast, and the machines were quite dangerous because they were going around so fast. But he came up with the idea of, rather than moving the tape very fast, moving the recording head very fast and putting it on a drum and spinning it round. And by inventing that, he invented the helical scan video recording system, which later became VHS, Betamax. Every videotape format you've ever seen relied on that. So he first came up with that idea, but he then set up his own company doing his own thing, and they've always had some connection to, it was always about sound, and it was always about the initial thing they did that made a lot of money was noise reduction. So magnetic tape recording inherently has its own built-in background, and it caused a hiss. So you'd have hiss. So they came up with a system which would basically reduce the built-in hiss of the system to be suppressed. And there was initially a thing called Dolby A, which was a professional one, and then they made a domestic one called Dolby B. You could see where
it's going with
that. And a moment of genius when the compact cassette became a thing. He did a deal with Philips, who'd invented it, and they put Dolby B onto compact cassette, and that made the compact cassette format work, because otherwise it was very hissy. But Dolby Laboratories Limited, Inc., whatever they are, got paid for every single one because it had their logo on it.
Of cassettes back in the day, like a lot of young listeners won't even ever held a cassette. A cassette was.
But through that, they then developed all sorts of other things beyond the noise reduction, and then they started moving into systems whereby they could put more tracks into mix cinema into more tracks, so that you had impression not just sound coming from the screen, but actually filling the room. The surround sound phenomenon. The thing they did cleverly was they copyrighted the word surround.
Oh, did they?
So you couldn't say it was surround. You had to say Dolby surround.
I see. And so when I go and watch Top Gun Maverick and I feel the plane has gone from behind my head and has come literally over the top of my head, or vice versa, then what is, I suppose, Brian, maybe you could talk us through what is happening sound-wise when that's happening?
Absolutely. Well, Andrew has already said this is to do with multi-channels. So rather than just stereo that most people are familiar with, left and right channels, we're now talking about maybe 6 channels, which would be our traditional surround, or 5.1. And you would have speakers placed around the room. There'd be 3 across the front, 1 center speaker behind the screen for sound to anchor it to the screen. Dialogue usually is in the middle there. That's what anchoring the sound to the image. And then you've got the left and right wide things for width, maybe music, things moving left to right a bit, and then a pair of surround channels, maybe speakers around the walls, around the back. And so you, by choosing how much sound to have in, say, the front or the rear, you can move sound backwards and forwards around the room. that for years was the most common surround sound at 5.1. Obviously that's developed further into, I'm not going to bore you with terminology, but 7.1, 9.1, Dolby Atmos is the big.
But 7 and 9 just refers to more speakers.
More speakers,
basically.
more channels, more speakers, absolutely.
Because I sat in the room, I remember being in Bristol in a cinema when we were mixing together, Brian, and you made a sound sort of do a thing where it kind of, it was like a magic trick. It sort of started left and went, shot over my head, and it's so exciting, that sound, moving sound around physically in the room. So, and Dolby Atmos, is it doing that? What's it doing?
It's, without getting too technical, it's doing that, but with much more precision, more channels. The thing that's limiting about those earlier surround channels, channel-based surround formats, it relies on the replay environment, the cinema or the home viewer, having exactly the same number of channels and exactly the same number of speakers,
which is speakers,
for it to work. Yes, absolutely. To experience that at home, you have to have the same 6 channels and speakers behind you. I mean, I don't have that set up at home. Many people don't.
Yeah.
And the same thing for cinema going larger as well. How do you make films more immersive, more three-dimensional? You would have increasing number of channels, and you want sound speakers in the ceilings overhead, so you can have things moving up and down and flying overhead. So it works really well in a 3D environment in the cinema, but you come into the situation of
someone's got a sound bar maybe, or a TV,
but just sort of explain why we end up in the situation of using it now is that you could mix in an environment that, say, had 22 surround channels, for example, and it'd be amazingly immersive, but then you want to take it to a cinema that doesn't have that. What do you do? So you then have to create separate mixes for every different environment, which is quite difficult to do. So the sort of the takeaway really for Dolby Atmos, I'm not going to go talk about the technicalities, but the idea being, here is one mix created in a format that can replay in different environments with different speaker setups and replay equally well. So I could do a mix in my studio, for example, which is 9.1.4. Not going to explain that, but anyway, but I could take that and replay it in a cinema with many more channels, and it would fill those. Or you could take the same mix and play it at home with someone who only has stereo or a soundbar, or maybe 5.1, and it would recreate a mix.
One ring to rule them all.
Exactly. That's why it's been adopted for home entertainment a lot now, as well as just cinema. Is it becomes something that translates across lots of different replay environments.
Wow.
But yes, to talk anymore would go into too much technicality, and I don't want to do that.
That's great. So I suppose as we come to close this out, can we sort of do a bit of time travel back? Hopefully there'll be some young listeners out there who've listened to this and go, do you know what? I've never really thought of making a career in sound editing, sound re-recording, sound dubbing. Those be different words for the same thing. And they're interested. We talk at Young Film Academy a lot how there's no one path, into the industry. Everyone's got a different story. So maybe could you just share, maybe Andrew, you could kick us off. Like, how did you find your way into this? What were you doing at teenage years and beyond that led you into this, or not?
Well, I it was never my plan. I was obsessed by music, pop music, what have you, at the time, and at that time there was a lot of very exciting stuff going on musically. Punk rock was a thing, and early electronic music was a thing, and heavy metal was starting to appear, and reggae was suddenly on the scene, and we still had disco, and prog rock was kind of hanging on in there, and there was just all this different stuff going on, even like novelty records. It was musically a very, very vibrant time, and I thought this was all really exciting. My favourite radio programme was John Peel on Radio 1, and I just thought, well, if I just join the BBC in the sound department, obviously I'll work on the John Peel show. Because the mind of a sort of 16, 17-year-old boy isn't great. It's a messy place, I'm sure you remember. So that's what I set out to do. I did get into the BBC after a couple of goes. I didn't go to university. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to university. I didn't.
So what age were you when you joined the BBC?
18.
18.
Yeah. I was so young that they actually paid me to go home and see my mum and dad every week. Not that I did, but I took the money. I went to see my mates, but and I never did get to work on the John Peel show. I was once in the same lift as John Peel, but that's as close as I got. But they sent me to Bristol, and we did. It was like an apprenticeship, and I did radio studios, radio outside broadcast, TV studios, TV outside broadcasts, and only in Bristol they also did film sound dubbing. And I made the mistake of of trying my best at it, whereas everybody else realised it was really boring, because the junior job in that at that time was a very boring thing. You sat in a room with loads of machines just watching them go round and didn't do much. But I made an effort and did my best, and I was rewarded by being allowed to do it more, whereas the other guys were taken off and did something else. But I found I quite enjoyed it. Once I started actually sort of mixing and getting a bit more hands-on, a bit more creative, I really enjoyed it. I got on with the people, and fortunately I found out I was reasonably good at it. And so it evolved, and it was probably, sort of 4 or 5 years. Also, there was a thing happening around that time where the technology shifted from analog film to the early digital things, and I was at the right point on that trajectory to suddenly go, whoa, look at this, I can make that work. And the older boys were like, I'm not sure about that thing, I'm hoping to retire soon, I don't want to have to learn it, it looks complicated. So I kind of got a bit lucky there. And
for which AI probably is the new version of that, maybe I don't know, it's hard to tell with AI. I mean, I still can't decide if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Everybody's talking about it. I think a lot of things that people talk about AI aren't AI, and there's machine learning, blah blah. Let's not. Within the sound world.
But so I kind of evolved into it. But what's weird is that it doesn't happen that often these days, because I'm old and jaded and bitter and twisted. But every now and then I finish a day's work and I think, I can't believe I got paid to do that, because I do a thing which a lot of people will pay good money to have a go at. And that's quite rewarding. If you can do a thing and pay the mortgage and put fuel in your car and put food on the table by doing a thing that ordinarily you would kind of pay money to do,
that is a privilege.
That is a real privilege. It doesn't happen every day. It happens maybe 2 or 3 times a year if I'm lucky, but it's worth it. It's well worth it. I mean, there are times when it's like, there's another wildebeest.
But I suppose what I'm hearing is, this is a story we've heard from so many of our guests, is this sense of, I call it almost like pebble by pebble. It's very few people have a sense of a journey when they first start. They don't know where they're going, they don't know how it's going to end up, but you just, once you follow one pebble or one opportunity, something else presents it from that one, you go to that one, and then something else opens up to that one, and it's almost, when you look back, you see a shape, but at the time it doesn't feel like a shape. You're just trying to take the opportunities as they present themselves, I suppose.
And I mean, I also had a couple of people very early on in my career who I don't know whether they weren't exactly mentor. One was a mentor, one was just a facilitator, but there were people who I can recognize who did a thing that made a difference. I mean, one in particular, when I was at school, they hadn't really invented work experience, but a very, very nice man who my parents met at a dinner party, who happened to work at Television Centre, said, well, he can come and spend a day with me. So I spent a day at Television Centre working on Top of the Pops, watching people making Top of the Pops. And I was blown away. And that one day, a spark was lit. And I knew, then that's the point at which I suddenly knew, I want to join the BBC. I want to do this thing in sound. That suddenly, it was all very exciting. Well,
I think we see that at Young Film Academy. If you get young people onto film sets or in that environment, which is a team doing something under pressure, that, some don't like it. They go, but actually a lot of young people go, wow, this is something I would really love to do. And it's not easy. And
also, it's, so now, now I'm at the other end of the time scale. It's super rewarding that, I want that. I mean, the guy that lit that spark for me was a man called Ken. I met him for one day in my whole life, but he lit a spark, and now I kind of have a thing, I want to be other people's Ken. I want to, if I can light that
not
spark,
in a Barbie sense though.
No, I'm not, definitely not like that. I'd need a lot of fake tan and a lot of waxing, but and every now and then, I come across people who seem interested in what I do, and I'll take a bit of time and chat to them and be nice to them and hopefully light a spark. I mean, and that's happened a few times. There's a few people who, I remember about 20 odd years ago, there was this guy came in, and he was a bit weird, but he seemed to be pretty keen, and I thought, he's probably got what it takes. That's Brian.
There he is. Boy done good.
Yeah.
Good.
But it is very rewarding, when I see people who Because you've been doing this a long time and you still enjoy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mostly.
So, well, Brian, what was your journey into it? What were you doing as a teenager apart from jacking cars and things?
I was far too well behaved for that. No, no. Similar to Andrew, it's not something I planned. You know, in that same sense. And I think probably the first sort of spark for me was when I was at school. It would have been maybe GCSE age. I was doing. What were we doing? It was in English lessons. We were studying Macbeth, and so we were split into groups and had to. In groups, do different scenes of Macbeth. This is going to go somewhere, believe me. And one of the roles I had to play Banquo, as he appeared as a ghost to Macbeth. And so I was discussing with the teacher how to make this work that didn't look stupid. And he introduced me to the idea of Pepper's Ghost, which is a lighting trick, an old theatrical lighting trick, possibly Victorian era, I think it was. It was creating the illusion of a character appearing on stage. By having the actor below the stage and a couple of panes of glass at 45 degrees, one above stage, one below, dim the lighting on the stage, boost the lighting below the stage, and then they appear like an apparition. You can make them appear and disappear. Very, very cool old trick. He told me that, and I thought, I want to do this. So I tried to do the same thing with hiding behind a curtain and a sheet of perspex and a light. Marginally successful. I mean, there's an attempt was made, but I went to a lot of effort to try and make the lighting work for this. As a result, which I loved, I thought it was great fun. As a result, I got asked to do lighting for everyone else's pieces as well, and that turned into something I did for the rest of my school years. I became the lighting guy. I was the school stage manager for the last 2 years. I lit the shows, rock concerts, and so on, and that was what I wanted to do. I discovered, I think, that in those last 2 years when I was a stage manager, I had a purpose, and it was a skill, and I was getting compliments on it, and I thought, great, I want to pursue being a lighting designer. So I went, again, not to university, I went to drama school to study lighting, sound, and technical theatre, because that was what I wanted to do. And it was while I was there, I discovered all the other things, like I suppose like you find with the Young Film Academy, you don't learn one role, you learn all the roles. So same with that training, I had to do stage management, I had to do lighting and photography and prop making and carpentry and all the roles that are part in putting on a show. And I left that training torn. I could have gone for lighting, sound, or prop making. They were my three favourites, and it was a case of whoever offered me a job first, almost, and it happened exactly like that. I was during my graduation show, I was lighting that, but and it was at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre, and I was approached by a director who's working there just to do a studio show, do some sound on that, and it was amazing because it was a show, quite a simple show, but he was a director who wanted every scene to have a soundscape, like an environment. It just doesn't normally happen in theatre. It happens in film all the time, but he wanted it to be like that. So I was creating soundscapes for this thing, and I loved it. And I saw that it was a really neglected side of the whole industry. Like you said earlier, people think very visually. Certainly in theatre, sound is very, very neglected. And I thought, I could make a mark here.
Absolutely. Well, we see that actually at Young Film Academy. A lot of students come, and when maybe they've never worked with sound, and they do, and some really love it. And we always say, if you do, because there's slightly less people trying to some degree, it can make their progression.
Absolutely. And I was very fortunate because on the back of doing that one show, the theatre then offered me a temporary position as the sound designer at the Bristol Old Vic, which was it was covering for someone who was leaving, and the next person they'd chosen was on tour and be joining for 6 months. So they said, you did a good job. Do you fancy doing the role? I was 19. I was way out of my depth. But I
Fake it till you make it.
Absolutely. I did it for a little while. The team were very supportive.
Love it.
But I quite quickly realised that theatre sound is neglected kind of for a reason. And I had that one amazing show, and then I had 6 months of just sort of sitting in a box at the back, just occasionally playing a doorbell sound effect off a CD, going, wow, actually, this is not very exciting at all, to be honest. I wasn't getting any creative satisfaction out of it. And it was during that time that I started sort of asking around. And I think I got in touch with my tutors and said, I'm really enjoying this, but I'm finding this a bit boring. And she put me in touch with Andrew here. And I didn't know at that point this job existed. And Andrew kindly let me come and sit in and watch him work. And I think the first thing I saw you do was an animation of some kind. I can't quite remember exactly what it was. It was a short, and possibly it might have been a commercial, but it was an animation anyway. And I was blown away. Suddenly, I saw that you're given a film with no sound, and the whole soundscape is built from the ground up, and you're creating this world. I love that.
Yeah, it's
absolutely love that.
So so we've gone full circle, guys. We've got the mentor. We've got that.
Yeah.
So this is brilliant. So just to wrap us up, let's time travel back, Andrew. We are going back to your teenage self, and you're going to be able to whisper one piece of advice in your teenage years. What would it be?
Only one is quite difficult. There's a combination of factors. I would say believe in yourself. Also, understand that you don't know it all. I've been doing it for over 40 years, and I still don't know it all. It can be useful in a mixed situation because I know a bit more than everybody else in the room, but I don't know it all. So we're always all learning. The day that you think you know it all is the day you should pack it in. So it would be those things. But by saying believe, I mean, if you have a dream, if it's the thing you want to do, go with it, and don't be afraid to suffer a bit in the early days. I mean, one thing that I did, which I know has held me back in a way, is if I'd made a break, a couple of opportunities came my way sort of in my mid to late 20s where I probably should have gone off and worked somewhere else. One was London, one was abroad, and those I think would have led to me working on some very different projects, which is more what I think I would have liked to do if I could have my time again. And I didn't do that because I chose to stay comfy in my nice little house and all that. But other than that, believe. If I had to do it in one word, I'd say just believe.
Be brave.
And be brave. And then the only other thing I would say is to get yourself. You need to mingle with people doing the thing that you want to do. You will learn more from sitting alongside the person doing the thing that you want to do for a couple of days than you will in several months on a course. And I'm not belittling education in any way. They do a brilliant job, and there's a lot of stuff you can learn, but there's a lot of stuff that you just can't teach
until you get out there and
I can teach you how to work a mixing desk. I can teach you what EQ is and what compression does, and I can teach you what Dolby Atmos is all about. I can teach you how to work the gear, but I can't teach you how to work the room. And that's probably the hardest thing, like working the room.
Brilliant. The politics. Yeah.
The politics. I mean, the difficult bit of the job is not the knobs in front of me. It's the ones sat behind me.
I'm
not sure where I left it.
That's brilliant. And finally, Brian, what would yours be?
I don't know if I could do it in one word, but if I were to go back and say something, it would be to reassure myself that I was on the right path. So it turns out what I did was exactly the right thing to do. I didn't know it at the time. And me going off to do drama school was it was a challenge. I was swimming upstream, let's say. It was I was facing a lot of backlash from both my parents and the school I was at. I went to quite an academic school. I wasn't one of the bright kids, but it was a very, very academic school. And they saw me opting not to go to university, and they treated me like a failure. And they wanted 100% going to university, and I was one of only 2 or 3 students who didn't. And they drummed it into me that I was making a huge mistake. I was quite, I was possibly going to go and do physics or something like that. I was quite good at it, surprisingly, but my heart wasn't in it. My heart was in the creative side. But there was a lot of pushback from both of them saying, you're making a mistake. And I sort of stuck to my guns, but it wasn't easy. And part of the reason was it was financially difficult. At the time, when I would have gone to university, fees were paid for by the government. Wouldn't that be nice? But I chose to go to a private fee-paying school, and I didn't come from a rich background. So at the time, it was like £9,000 a year fees. But, in the 90s, that's a huge amount of money. I didn't come from a wealthy family. So, and I didn't have that money. So it took me. I managed to get funding from charitable organisations to pay for some of my fees. I borrowed stuff from a bank through career development loans. It took a lot of work, and the whole time I was being talked out of it.
Yeah.
And I stuck with it,
So
and I'm so pleased I did. But
it's sticking to your guns and finding
absolutely.
a way.
So it's going back and just saying, stick with it. This is right.
Stick with it.
Because there are many times when I nearly stopped.
Yeah.
And
Follow your heart in some ways, and that's a great
persistence is one of
message.
it,
Yeah, and persistence. Well, guys, thank you so much. What a joy this has been. It's been wonderful to have you on. Thank you for sharing your experience. Hopefully that this has lit the spark for some others to follow in your footsteps, both of you. This has been a real joy. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you very much.